What happens when the world's most unpredictable billionaire meets late-night television's sharpest wit? Tonight, we're diving into one of the most explosive celebrity interviews ever recorded, where egos collided, tempers flared, and security had to step in. This is the untold story of how Elon Musk got himself permanently banned from Jimmy Kimmel Live. Make sure to subscribe and drop a comment because this story gets wilder by the minute. The green room backstage at Jimmy Kimmel Live was unusually tense that evening. Production assistants scurried around making last-minute adjustments while Jimmy Kimmel sat in his dressing room, reviewing his notes one final time. His guest for tonight's show was someone he had been particularly eager to interview, someone whose recent public statements had been generating controversy across social media platforms. 5 minutes to showtime, Jimmy called out his producer, knocking on the door. Kimmel nodded, straightening his tie as he made his way toward the stage. The studio audience was already buzzing with anticipation. They knew tonight's guest had a reputation for saying exactly what was on his mind, regardless of the consequences. Meanwhile, in the guest green room, Elon Musk sat alone, scrolling through his phone with an expression that could only be described as irritated. He had been fielding calls from his public relations team all day, people telling him to play it safe, to stick to talking points, to avoid controversial topics. But Musk had never been one to follow anyone else's script. "Mr. Musk, we're ready." "For you," said a young production assistant, clearly nervous about approaching the tech mogul. Musk looked up from his phone, his jaw set in a way that suggested he was already in combative mode. "About time," he muttered, standing up and following the assistant toward the stage entrance. The familiar opening music of Jimmy Kimmel Live began to play, and the audience erupted in applause as Kimmel walked out, his trademark smile lighting up the studio. He waved to the crowd, soaking in their energy before taking his place behind the desk. "Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the show," Kimmel began, his voice carrying that perfect balance of warmth and mischief that had made him a late-night favorite. "We have quite a show for you tonight. Our guest is someone who has revolutionized multiple industries, from electric vehicles to space exploration, though lately he's been making headlines for some rather different reasons." The audience chuckled, sensing the underlying tension in Kimmel's introduction. "Please welcome Elon Musk," Kimmel announced, and the applause was polite but noticeably more reserved than usual. Musk walked out onto the stage with his characteristic awkward gait, offering a brief wave to the audience before settling into the guest chair. His body language was immediately defensive, arms crossed, leaning back as if he was already preparing for battle. "Elon, thanks for being here," Kimmel said, his smile warm but his eyes watchful. "Thanks for having me, Jimmy," Musk replied, though his tone suggested he wasn't particularly grateful for the invitation. "So, let's dive right in," Kimmel continued, leaning forward slightly. "You've been pretty active on social media lately, sharing some interesting opinions about various topics. Do you ever worry that some of your posts might be, well, a little inflammatory?" Musk's expression immediately hardened. "I think the real question, Jimmy, is why everyone is so obsessed with policing what people say online. I thought we believed in free speech in this country." "We absolutely do," Kimmel replied smoothly. "But with great platform comes great responsibility, right? You have millions of followers who hang on your every word. And that's their choice." Musk shot back, his voice taking on an edge. "I'm not responsible for how other people interpret my thoughts. Maybe the problem isn't what I'm saying. Maybe the problem is that people have become too sensitive to hear the truth." The audience shifted uncomfortably in their seats. This wasn't the playful banter they were used to seeing on late-night television. Kimmel maintained his composure, but there was a flicker of something sharper in his eyes. "The truth according to whom, though? I mean, you've made some pretty bold claims about things you might not be an expert in." "Expert?" Musk let out a harsh laugh. "Jimmy, with all due respect, what exactly makes you an expert on anything? You tell jokes for a living. I've built companies that are literally changing the world." The studio fell silent. Even the camera operators seemed to tense up behind their equipment, but Kimmel's smile never wavered, but his voice took on a cooler tone. "You're right, I do tell jokes for a living. And sometimes those jokes are about people who think they're smarter than everyone else in the room." "Is that supposed to be a shot at me?" Musk demanded, uncrossing his arms and leaning forward aggressively. "If the rocket ship fits," Kimmel replied with practiced timing. earning a few nervous laughs from the audience. Musk's face flushed red. You know what, Jimmy? This is exactly the problem with mainstream media. You invite someone on your show just so you can mock them and make them look bad in front of your audience. I invited you on my show to have a conversation, Kimmel countered, his voice remaining steady despite the rising tension. But if you're going to come on here and act like you're above being questioned about your public statements, then maybe this isn't the right venue for you. Maybe it isn't. Musk snapped, his voice getting louder. Maybe I should have known. Better than to expect actual journalism from someone whose biggest claim to fame is making fun of people who are actually trying to make a difference in the world. The audience was now completely silent, watching this train wreck unfold in real time. Production crew members could be seen moving closer to the stage, clearly concerned about where this confrontation was heading. Kimmel set down his cards and looked directly at Musk. You know what's interesting, Elon? You came on this show knowing exactly what it was. You knew I was going to ask you tough questions, and you knew I might poke fun at some of your more controversial statements. But instead of defending your positions with facts or humor, you're attacking me personally and questioning my right to ask those questions. Because your questions are garbage, Musk fired back, his composure completely gone now. They're designed to make me look bad, not to actually understand what I'm trying to accomplish. I'm trying to understand why someone with your influence thinks it's okay to spread misinformation to millions of people, Kimmel replied, his voice finally showing some heat. Misinformation? Musk stood up from his chair, towering over the desk. Everything I post is based on data and research. Just because you don't understand it doesn't make it misinformation. The tension in the studio was now palpable. Security personnel had moved into position near the stage, ready to intervene if necessary. Kimmel remained seated, looking up at Musk with a mixture of disappointment and determination. Sit down, Elon. Let's finish this conversation like adults. I'm done with this conversation, Musk declared, but he didn't move toward the exit. Instead, he seemed to be gearing up for an even bigger confrontation. I'm done with this conversation, Musk declared, but instead of walking away, he turned back to face Kimmel with renewed fury. You want to know what the real problem is here, Jimmy? You and every other talk show host think you can invite successful people onto your shows just to tear them down for cheap laughs. Kimmel slowly stood up from behind his desk, matching Musk's energy. Nobody's trying to tear you down, Elon. But when you come on national television, you don't get to control the narrative like you do on your social media platforms. Control the narrative? Musk's voice cracked with indignation. I'm trying to have an honest conversation, but you keep twisting everything I say to fit your little comedy bits. Then let's have that honest conversation, Kimmel challenged, stepping out from behind his desk. You've been promoting conspiracy theories, attacking journalists, and spreading unverified information to your millions of followers. How is that helping anyone? Musk's eyes narrowed dangerously. Conspiracy theories? You mean like questioning why certain stories get buried while others get promoted? Or wondering why some voices get silenced while others get amplified? If asking questions makes me a conspiracy theorist, then what does that make you? It makes me someone who does his homework before making wild accusations, Kimmel shot back. I don't just tweet the first thing that pops into my head and call it research. At least I'm not a puppet reading scripts written by corporate overlords, Musk snarled. When was the last time you had an original thought that wasn't approved by your network executives? The audience gasped audibly. Several people could be heard murmuring in shock at how personal the attacks had become. Kimmel's face darkened, his professional composure finally starting to crack. You want to talk about corporate overlords? You're literally one of the richest people on the planet, Elon. You own multiple companies, you have more influence than most world leaders, and you use that power to settle personal vendettas on social media. I use that power to speak truth to power, Musk countered, his voice rising to almost a shout. Something you clearly wouldn't understand since you spend your time making jokes about people who are actually trying to change the world. Change the world. Kimmel let out a bitter laugh. You mean like when you called that rescue diver a pedophile because he criticized your submarine idea? Or when you manipulated cryptocurrency markets with your tweets? That kind of world-changing. Musk's face went white with rage. How dare you bring up something that was taken completely out of context? That diver was attacking me personally, and I responded. As for cryptocurrency, I have every right to express my opinions about financial markets. You have the right, sure, Kimmel agreed, his voice dripping with sarcasm. But that doesn't make it responsible. People lost their life savings because they followed your financial advice. People need to make their own decisions, Musk snapped. I'm not their financial advisor. If they can't handle market volatility, they shouldn't be investing. Listen to yourself, Kimmel said, shaking his head in disgust. You just admitted that your words move markets, but you take no responsibility for the consequences. That's not leadership, Elon. That's recklessness. Musk took a step closer to Kimmel, his fists clenched at his sides. You want to talk about recklessness? How about the recklessness of having a platform like this show and using it to tear down people who are actually making a difference? How about the recklessness of pretending to be some kind of moral authority when you're just another Hollywood talking head? I never claimed to be a moral authority, Kimmel replied, standing his ground despite Musk's intimidating posture. But I do claim the right to ask tough questions when someone with your influence acts irresponsibly. Irresponsibly? Musk's voice was now bordering on hysteria. I've revolutionized the automotive industry. I've advanced space exploration by decades. I've created thousands of jobs, and I've pushed humanity toward a sustainable future. What have you done besides make people laugh at other people's expense? The studio was now completely silent except for the sound of cameras still rolling. Security personnel had moved even closer to the stage, their hands hovering near their radios. Kimmel's eyes flashed with anger. You know what, Elon? You're right. All I do is make people laugh. But at least I don't pretend that makes me qualified to give medical advice during a global pandemic or to spread misinformation about democratic elections or to attack anyone who dares to criticize me. Medical advice? Musk exploded. I shared publicly available data and encouraged people to think for themselves instead of blindly following government mandates. And as for elections, I simply asked questions that any thinking person should ask. Questions that undermined people's faith in democracy itself, Kimmel fired back. Questions that led to real-world violence and chaos. But I guess that's just collateral damage in your quest for truth, right? Musk's entire body was now trembling with rage. You are everything that's wrong with this country, Jimmy. You and people like you have turned journalism into entertainment and entertainment into propaganda. You don't care about truth, you only care about ratings. And you don't care about anything except your own ego, Kimmel retorted. You can't handle being questioned, you can't handle being criticized, and you certainly can't handle being wrong about anything. I'm not wrong, Musk shouted, his voice echoing through the studio. I'm just not willing to pretend that everything is fine when it's not. I'm not willing to smile and nod while the world burns around us. The world isn't burning because of the problems you think you're solving, Kimmel said with cutting precision. It's burning because people like you think being rich and successful makes you right about everything. Musk's face contorted with fury. People like me? What's that supposed to mean? It means entitled billionaires who think they can buy their way out of any consequences, Kimmel replied without hesitation. It means people who have so much money and power that they've forgotten what it's like to be accountable to anyone. I'm more accountable than you'll ever be, Musk screamed, completely losing control now. Every decision I make affects thousands of employees, millions of customers, and the entire future of human civilization. Your decisions affect whether people laugh at your stupid jokes. The tension had reached a breaking point. Production crew members were now openly signaling to each other, clearly preparing to intervene. The audience sat in stunned silence, witnessing what had become less of an interview and more of a public breakdown. Kimmel looked at Musk with a mixture of pity and disgust. You know what, Elon? I think we're done here. This clearly isn't working out for either of us. But Musk wasn't ready to leave. Instead, he stepped even closer to Kimmel, his face red with anger and his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. Musk stepped even closer to Kimmel, his face red with anger and his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. You have no idea who you're dealing with, Jimmy. I could destroy your career with a single tweet. I could make sure you never work in this industry again. The threat hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Kimmel didn't back down, instead meeting Musk's gaze with steely determination. Is that a threat, Elon? Are you threatening me on live television? It's not a threat, Musk hissed, his voice barely audible, but somehow more chilling than his earlier shouting. It's a promise. You think you can humiliate me in front of millions of people and just walk away? You think there won't be consequences? The studio audience was now visibly uncomfortable, with several people standing up and looking toward the exits. The cameras kept rolling, capturing every second of what was quickly becoming television history for all the wrong reasons. Kimmel took a step back, not out of fear, but to create space between himself and the increasingly unhinged billionaire. Ladies and gentlemen, this is what happens when someone isn't used to being held accountable for their actions. They resort to threats and intimidation. Intimidation? Musk's voice cracked as he followed Kimmel's retreat. You want to see intimidation? I'll show you what real power looks like. I'll make sure everyone knows what a pathetic little puppet you really are. Security personnel were now moving rapidly toward the stage, their professional demeanor barely masking their alarm at how quickly the situation was deteriorating. Elon, you need to calm down, Kimmel said firmly, raising his hands in a gesture that was part peacekeeping, part self-protection. You're embarrassing yourself on national television. I'm embarrassing myself? Musk let out a maniacal laugh that sent chills through everyone in the studio. You're the one who invited me here to ambush me with your little gotcha questions. You're the one who's been attacking me from the moment I sat down. I asked you legitimate questions about your public statements, Kimmel replied, his voice remaining steady despite the chaos unfolding around him. If you can't handle being questioned about things you've said publicly, then maybe you shouldn't be saying them. Musk's composure completely shattered. I can handle anything you throw at me, you insignificant little worm. The problem is that you're not worth my time. None of this is worth my time. You're all just jealous of what I've accomplished. Nobody's jealous of your behavior tonight. Kimmel shot back, his own patience finally wearing thin. This is exactly why people are starting to see through your carefully crafted public image. This is who you really are when things don't go your way. The words hit Musk like a physical blow. His face went pale, then flushed red again as he struggled to process the accusation. You don't know anything about who I really am. You don't know what I've sacrificed, what I've endured, what I've built from nothing. I know enough, Kimmel replied coldly. I know that you can't handle criticism, you can't admit when you're wrong, and you certainly can't have a civil conversation with someone who disagrees with you. Musk's hands began to shake with rage. Civil conversation? You call this ambush? A civil conversation? You've been trying to destroy me from the moment I walked out here. I've been trying to get you to take responsibility for your actions, Kimmel corrected. But apparently that's impossible for someone who thinks they're above accountability. Above accountability? Musk screamed, his voice now completely out of control. I'm accountable to shareholders, to employees, to customers, to the future of humanity itself. I don't need to be accountable to some failed comedian who peaked 20 years ago. The insult struck home, and for the first time, Kimmel's professional mask slipped completely. Failed comedian? I've been successfully entertaining people for decades while you've been having public meltdowns on social media. At least when I fail, I don't blame it on the media or my critics or some vast conspiracy. You want to talk about failure? Musk roared, completely losing all semblance of control. Your whole career is built on making fun of people who are actually trying to make a difference. You're a parasite, Jimmy. You contribute nothing to society except cheap laughs and petty gossip. Security guards were now rushing onto the stage, their presence finally breaking through Musk's fury long enough for him to realize how far the situation had deteriorated. Sir, we need you to come with us, one of the guards said firmly, positioning himself between Musk and Kimmel. Musk looked around wildly, as if suddenly realizing where he was and what he had done. The studio audience was staring at him in a mixture of shock and disgust. The cameras were still rolling, capturing every moment of his complete breakdown. Get your hands off me, Musk snarled at the security guard, but his voice lacked the venom it had carried moments before. Reality was starting to set in. Mr. Musk, please don't make this more difficult than it needs to be, the guard replied. Calmly, clearly trained for exactly this type of situation. Kimmel watched from a safe distance, his expression a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. You know, Elon, this could have been a great interview. We could have had a real conversation about your accomplishments, your vision for the future, your companies. Instead, you chose to turn it into this circus. Musk whirled around to face Kimmel one last time, his eyes blazing with a fury that seemed to burn even brighter in the face of his obvious defeat. This isn't over, Jimmy. You have no idea what you've started here tonight. Actually, I think it is over, Kimmel replied with finality. Security, please escort Mr. Musk out of the building and make sure he understands that he's not welcome back. As the security guards began to guide Musk toward the exit, he continued to shout over his shoulder, "You're all going to regret this. Every single person in this studio is going to regret treating me like this." The studio audience watched in stunned silence as one of the world's most powerful men was escorted off the stage like a common troublemaker. Some people pulled out their phones, capturing the final moments of what would undoubtedly become one of the most infamous talk show appearances in television history. Kimmel stood alone on the stage, watching Musk's retreating figure with a mixture of exhaustion and disappointment. The billionaire's threats continued to echo through the studio even as he disappeared from view, his voice growing fainter but no less venomous. "Well, folks," Kimmel said, turning back to address his audience, with remarkable composure considering what had just transpired, "I think that's probably enough excitement for one evening." The audience erupted in applause, partly out of relief that the confrontation was over and partly out of appreciation for Kimmel's handling of an impossible situation. As the show cut to commercial, the buzz in the studio was unlike anything anyone had ever experienced. Crew members were already talking about how the clip would go viral within hours, how it would be analyzed and discussed for years to come. Kimmel made his way back to his desk, straightening his tie and trying to process what had just happened. In all his years of hosting late-night television, he had never experienced anything quite like this. He had interviewed controversial figures before, dealt with difficult guests, even had people walk out mid-interview. But nothing had prepared him for the sheer intensity of Musk's meltdown. The commercial break seemed to last forever, giving everyone a chance to catch their breath and try to make sense of what they had just witnessed. When the show returned from break, Kimmel would have to find a way to continue the program as if nothing had happened, to maintain the illusion of normalcy in the face of absolute chaos. But for now, in the relative quiet of the commercial break, the only sound was the distant echo of Musk's final threats still ringing in everyone's ears, a reminder that some bridges, once burned, can never be rebuilt. So what do you think? Was Jimmy Kimmel right to push back against Musk's behavior? Or did he go too far in his questioning? Subscribe to the channel and let me know in the comments what you think really caused Elon Musk to completely lose control that night.